There is a major confrontation underway, and the best news we got on our travels is while we were there, the White House let it be known that President Trump was planning to meet with President Xi in Buenos Aires at the end of November. That's really good news because
at the G7 or
G20 meeting in Buenos Aires right at the end of November. Just an opportunity when both leaders are there. Because people on both sides in both governments have said to us this can really only be resolved at the very highest level. They need to give instructions to their negotiators to sit down and cut a deal.
How does the Business Roundtable feel about this? Because it's a pretty complex issue. There are companies that are already doing a lot of business and don't want to see anything disrupted. There are others that feel like they're getting ripped off from intellectual property or being forced to be in these joint ventures. So you talk to different business leaders and you hear a lot of different things. What's the consensus?
You do, and we have all of that whole spectrum of interests within the Business Roundtable, but the companies are united in wanting to see some important reforms in the Chinese market. They need to open up to investment. They need to reduce their barriers to entry into the Chinese market. They need to make sure that once you get into the Chinese market, that it's possible to compete on a level playing field, that the regulation isn't going to be tilted against the foreigner, and so on. There's a lot of work to be done in China, and almost every multinational business experiences some problem. So we've been actually very supportive of a lot of the administration's objectives in the trade confrontation they're having with China. We've objected to, however, a lot of the tactics because we think that the imposition of a heavy dose of tariffs before really sitting down to attempt a negotiation has been counterproductive.
What I hear from a lot of people behind the scenes is that the most likely way that you get to some sort of an agreement would be a more superficial one that takes a look at the trade deficit and says, we can chip away at this here, but we're going to leave some of these other big issues behind. That seems counter to what a lot of businesses, and Stephen Mnuchin, when he was with us, said that he would like to see the joint ventures, forced joint ventures and the forced transfer of technology go away. So what do you think about that? I mean, that seems like a much bigger hurdle.
Yeah.
And a tougher one to kind of get at.
It is, but it would be a disappointment if we came away from this confrontation, which has already caused a fair amount of damage to a lot of U.S. companies, not just Chinese companies. But it would be a disappointment to come away from this confrontation with nothing more than a short-term deal to buy some more LNG or something like that. There's a lot of fundamental stuff that needs to happen. And that's much harder to negotiate than a deal just to temporarily buy a few more products. Because if that's what you do, you're just kicking the can down the road. We're going to have the same problem 2 or 3 years from now.
Does the Roundtable view the midterms as a seminal moment or an important moment? Are you involved with different races anywhere?
We don't do politics in that way, but it's Joe. It's a very important moment because it'll dictate for at least the next 2 years the direction of the Congress, and we had very important success in this past Congress with the adoption, especially of tax reform, which has been huge for our
people
economies.
Don't know whether they like it or not. In general, in terms of
American
polls.
Voters.
Voters maybe, but I can tell you from the standpoint of Business Roundtable companies who employ a lot of those voters.
I mean, it's either deregulation or tax, something somewhere along the line moved us into a higher gear, I think. Can I at least say that,
Absolutely.
Andrew?
Absolutely did.
Is that fair?
Is
that a stretch?
No, I don't know.
Well, I got to ask Andrew.
I don't think it's a stretch at all.
Well, that's what I mean. And I just, I wonder whether, you can't really take it away if all you do is win the House, because it's, you can't reverse any of that stuff if you win the House. How is it in jeopardy based on the midterms, would you think?
Well, if the House goes Democratic, then there's always some risk.
No new stuff. They'll do investigations. There won't be any additional progress, but what's already been done, you can't reverse.
But therefore, what is the position of the Business, or the Business Roundtable says it doesn't take a position, but it wants.
They like growth, Andrew. They like.
No,
GDP.
I understand that.
They like GDP to go up.
Right, but it's very interesting because you also have people on all sides of this, on all sides of politics that are part of the Business Roundtable.
Sure. Yeah. We've got Democrats and
They all
Republicans,
like growth,
but every one of them likes pro-growth economic policies, which means don't mess with the tax cuts,
Right.
which are, as Joe just said, are doing a lot to make this country much more
Okay, let me ask you a separate
competitive.
question, which is the big headline in virtually every paper this morning has something to do with Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So many U.S. executives have been caught in this issue around not just going to this conference, which has become sort of this public symbol or crucible but more about the relationship that the U.S. should have with Saudi, that these companies should have with Saudi. What do you tell them? I imagine you've been on the phone with some of them over the past couple of days.
Well, right now, we had a number of our CEOs who were planning to attend the conference, and now none of them is planning to attend the conference.
Right.
And that's what CEOs deal with. You know, you want to do business with everybody you can reasonably do business with, but sometimes the geopolitics
But so
make
the
it
complicated
impossible.
part is they won't be at the conference next week. That's one part of it. But the question that may arise on a longer term basis is, do you do business in Saudi? And by the way, what kind of retribution you think Saudi, in terms of the way they think about loyalty, will think about the decisions not to attend this very high profile conference? Given, by the way, just the report in the FT yesterday that Richard Branson pulled out, or at least said he was postponing the Hyperloop. All of a sudden, the Saudis turned around and said, actually, no, we're not going to do business with them either. So, I mean, is your expectation that some of these companies will actually be hurt by this decision?
I hope not, but all of the CEOs who were in that conference and pulled out took some risk in their relationship with the Saudis.
Right.
Andrew, you did the same.
Absolutely, but
you pulled out, and
different question. Since you used to be in the White House, do you think that Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin should be going?
I'm gonna leave that to the I'm gonna leave that to the incumbent chief of staff to make a recommendation to Mnuchin. But yeah, it's a tough situation. This is the kind of place where Americans need to stand up and say, these are our values, this is what we stand for, and even if it causes some economic damage, that's what you have to do.
Wait till we go to break and ask Josh if he worked with Kavanaugh and what he thought of Kavanaugh, but we're going to go to break first.
Josh, I want to thank you very much for your time today.